My name is Gianni Russo, a.k.a. Carlo, the infamous son-in-law from The Godfather. I'm now known as the Hollywood Godfather, and this is my story.
Before all of the wins in my portfolio, I was a little boy diagnosed with polio. Experimenting with cures, I tried every one. Felt everything in my right, but my left was numb. Walking with a limp, like will I ever run? Once again, or is this it? Am I forever done? Living in the hospital was never fun. Some people were cool, but not everyone. You never know who you're lying in a room with. So I broke a broomstick in half and let it groove with the concrete in the bathroom floor. It had a new tip, stashed it behind the toilet in case I ever had to use it. Cause one day Dolores...
Speak softly loud and hold me warm against your heart. I hear your words, the tender trembling.
Welcome, everybody. Another broadcast of Hollywood Godfather podcast. And we have our special guest back with some more information. And I'm going to let Pat introduce him. You all know him. You've been on the show before. And he's probably one of the most exciting guests we have.
Okay. It's been said in the land of private investigators that you're as good as your research and your sources. That's what private investigation is all about. And I always appreciate somebody that can do a deep dive into any subject that they're concentrating on. Our guest tonight has been here before, and he is the king. Now, I'm a writer. I don't pretend to be in the same class as our guest, but I am a writer, and I admire somebody that can write and do research the way this man can do. Tonight we have a special guest back, Mark Shaw, who's going to impart information to us that's never been released. And I think this is going to be an eye-opener for everybody. So without further delay, I give you Mr. Mark Shaw from San Francisco.
Thank you, guys. I'm honored to be on the show again. The new book is Fighting for Justice, The Improbable Journey to Exposing the Cover-Ups of the JFK Assassination and the Deaths of Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Kilgallen. And the improbable journey of this has to do with how in the world a guy like me from a small town in Indiana, nearly flunked out of Purdue University, took me 6 years to get through there. I'm not the smartest guy in the world and all of that, but this will be my sixth book touching on the JFK assassination, Dorothy and Marilyn. And this one's very special. And I want to say right off that there are a couple things that are important here. You both know that I would not be on your program if it weren't for this incredible, revered, respected reporter named Dorothy Kilgallen. For those people who don't know who she is, all I knew when I started out, when I wrote a book about Melvin Belli, Jack Ruby's attorney, was that she was a star panelist on What's My Line television show every Sunday night on CBS. 10 million people watched that show. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but in 1950s and 60s, it was. It ran for 15 years. And I didn't know that much about Dorothy except for that. And then I learned she was a syndicated reporter to 200 newspapers across the country. She had a Voice of Broadway column that talked about not only Broadway, but criminal trials and all different kinds of personalities and all of that. And also she had a radio show with her husband, Dorothy and Dick, Breakfast with Dorothy and Dick, listened to by 1 million people a day. The New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America. So I ran across Dorothy when I was able to learn that she was at the Jack Ruby trial. She was in the front row. And the reason that she did, I want to go into more about Dorothy for a while here, because I think it's important, because every single thing we're going to talk about tonight, including what I believe is one of the greatest exposures of government corruption in history, corruption at the Warren Commission, it all revolves around Dorothy. And I'm going to connect her in with that corruption because she knew, actually, and was a good friend of one of the Warren Commission members. So what do we know about Dorothy? Well, she was a college dropout. We know that she decided that she didn't want to go to college. She wanted to be a newspaper reporter like her father, Jim Kilgallen. And, I found some recent information through my research, guys, that Dorothy had actually spent some time in Ireland where her great-grandparents were. And her father, Jim, was also there. And Jim Kilgallen, when William Randolph Hearst, who's a big name back then, was asked to name the reporters that he had the most respect for in his life, he named Jim and Dorothy Kilgallen. Wow. And that's really quite a compliment, as you can imagine. But Dorothy began as a cub reporter at the New York Journal-American, which was one of the big newspapers at the time. And in the book, I found all kinds of new information about her. One of the women said when she walked through the door the first time, they thought she was going to, on her way to school. She was that raw. And yet she started going on. And, one of the first things that one of the reporters said to her, if you're going to be a reporter here, you've got to know how to look at dead bodies. So they sent her to the morgue. And the account that I have by the editor says, get accustomed to the sight of death if you are going to be any use to this paper. So she had to go to the morgue and look at bodies where there was suicide involved. And on the first day that she covered that, the autopsy report, covered with, horrid photographs and everything else, the reporter said she was about to faint since her facial features were as pallid as a nearby corpse. To the rescue came a stick of gum, and apparently the sugar intake saved Dorothy from hitting the cement floor face first.
Wow.
So when we talk about what evidence she uncovered all the way through the JFK assassination to the Warren Commission corruption, that's where she started. And, she got a big break when she covered the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping case. Now, remember, in those days, women were not supposed to be in the car behind, in the back seat of the car. They were supposed to be in the car behind. Almost all of her rival reporters, were men. Damon Runyon, Walter Winchell, big names from the past and all of that. And so, she had to begin by overcoming those kinds of obstacles. The editor also is quoted as saying, "You've got Jim Kilgallen's kid. Go easy on her. She's just out of the convent." She was just as green as could be. And
Walter Winchell, Mark.
What's that?
Walter Winchell introduced me to her at the Copa Lounge.
Oh, my God. See, that's got to be in the book. Why didn't you tell me that?
No, but I met her several times. I wasn't impressed with her, but, she was so well revered by all of them.
Oh, she sure was. And there's one story I like, and apparently, I confirm my research just like you guys do, and I know, that's important to you. At one particular point, she was standing outside Sing Sing prison there in New York City, covering the release of a gangster who had just been released on parole. And apparently, according to the article that I read, a man walked by and she was confronted by him. Because of the article she had written about his sister. And the article says, before Dorothy could pass, he stuffed a gun in her face, but somehow by her not screaming or moving away, the man lowered the gun and fled. Later, she told a colleague, "I fully expected to die and couldn't move because I was too scared to do so." Wow. She was gutsy, and I think you would agree with that, Gianni. She was gutsy. She was always, there's even a story of how she wrote her articles. The first article she wrote, the editor reports, he sent it back. She sent it again. He sent it back 5 times until she got it right. And her father had given her a great lesson. When she asked him what's the most important thing about a reporter, he said, to tell the truth. And that's what Dorothy learned. That's how she became such a woman of integrity. I even found other incidents of interest about her. For instance, many people have said Dorothy wasn't a beautiful woman. Well, she wasn't. But she had that power, And at one point, I got a kick out of it because I found an article in one of the Irish magazine, Princess Best Groomed Woman. And that was Princess Margaret. But guess who made the list? Dorothy Kilgallen. And so this is the woman. Oh, also in this story, when she died in 1965, 10,000 people were at that funeral. 10,000 people for a reporter, if you can imagine. And a woman said, this woman named Betsy said, you know, I know a story about Dorothy nobody else knows. She brought my baby out of a burning building. The building I lived in caught on fire. Miss Kilgallen was across the street and she heard the sirens. She went into the building in her beautiful white and sequin dress and took my little baby, wet diapers and all, and carried him out of the building.
Wow.
Now that's Dorothy Kilgallen.
You know, Mark, if I can interrupt you for a second, you're talking about how many people showed up for her funeral. People, a tremendous number then, now, and in the future. And when you started to introduce her, you talked about the biggest reporters of the time, and you mentioned Walter Winchell. You know how many people showed up at his funeral?
No.
None.
Is that right?
Not one person showed up for his funeral.
That's interesting.
He was universally hated.
Oh,
Not by Frank Costello. I'm surprised Frank didn't show up. Did he die before Frank or after Frank?
I don't know, but he died, I think, in the late 60s. I'm not sure, but anyway, I read an extensive biography on him a few years ago, and the theme of the book was the amount of vitriol that was directed towards him. No one liked the man. He was just a rotten bastard. No one liked him. And
you know, I liked him. I had pleasures of seeing him constantly. He was always at the Copa Lounge.
Oh yeah,
and I mean, maybe because of who I was just a kid, but
right.
I really liked the guy. In fact, you know what's so funny? As we read all of this stuff and all the stuff you've given us to read, Mark, I knew Mark Sinclair too.
Oh yes, I know you did, from the beauty salon.
Yeah, and I worked at Lily Deshay as a shampoo boy for him and Kenneth, which is so bizarre. I'm such from a different world, and here, you know, we're talking about them. And when they used to send me to the barber zone late at 9:15 at night to get flowers for the table, and they were like Grace Kelly and Audrey Hepburn to bring back to the Copa, because I would pay the room monitor at night, because they had to be in by 9, and all their mothers thought, you know, they were in their bed, and they wanted to go out and meet Walter Winchell because he could make them a star, and he did.
Absolutely.
A very powerful man, most powerful reporter in the United States. But it just goes to show you the difference between Walter and Dorothy.
Yeah, you know, so many people, and I'm sure listeners to your podcast, watchers, will get in touch with me. I didn't know what crowdsourcing meant until a couple of weeks ago. And I'm going to appear at the Commonwealth Club of San Francisco on December 1st. And when they put the description of my lecture up there, they said he's a magnet for crowdsourcing. And I didn't know what that meant, but I looked it up. And basically it says, if you put information out there of some sort, then you're going to get feedback from people. And it's going to embellish on that information that you had. And I am the king or whatever of crowdsourcing, because, for instance, Gianni's just telling me things that I'll probably want to include in any more material that I write at some point with his permission. So that's what's happened with Dorothy, because so many people around the world have said, I wish we had a reporter with integrity like Dorothy today. And that, if you go to the Dr. Sam Shepard case, let's look at that one, you know, became the fugitive movie. My favorite photograph of her is on the DorothyKilgallenStory.org. She's standing in the middle of the courtroom there, and here's 20 or 30 reporters from all over the world in admiration of her, looking at Dorothy. Dorothy was, you know, the queen of journalists at that particular point. And yet, as we'll find out, when the JFK assassination happened, they never listened to her. I don't want to let this go without just reading, because reading some of her writings quickly, because that was her blessing. If I could write as well as Dorothy Kilgallen, did, I would have had a number of bestsellers instead of just the reporter who knew too much. Listen to this. This was her description of Jack Ruby when she first met him at the trial. Jack Ruby's eyes were as shiny brown and white bright as the glass eyes of a doll. He tried to smile, but his smile was a failure. When we shook hands, his hand trembled on mine ever so slightly by the heartbeat of a bird. I went out of that. I went out of that courtroom, empty courtroom, wondering what I really believed about this man. And if you look at all of her writings in her columns and everything else that she wrote, you know, she put us in there. She put us in the Ruby trial. She put us in the Dr. Sam Shepard trial, in the baby kidnapping case, and lesser cases as well. She was so visual with her writing. And hopefully she's helped me in terms of improving my writing. And when we talk about the Warren Commission corruption being exposed on your program, frankly, for the first time, we're going to be able to take you inside the hearings because I've got a witness who was right there when all of that happened. But that's what Dorothy's gift was. She could, and I think that's why she was so popular with her writings, because it was so visual what she wrote. Okay, let me see.
It's funny because now you mentioned Jack Ruby, and I myself met Jack Ruby several times because I was going.
Why am I not surprised?
Well, I was going to Texas for
oh yes,
Chicago.
That's right. You were. That's
Hello.
right. Yeah, I'd like to get into that if we can, please. So that's Dorothy Kilgallen, and what I think we ought to do then is to really look at what were some of her accomplishments. Well, the Queen died not too long ago, right? Queen of England.
Right.
Dorothy Kilgallen was in England and covered the coronation. She got a Pulitzer Prize winning nomination for that. And this article talks about, it's by the New York Post. It was drizzling in the morning of blank, blank, blank as Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip rode up Broadway, receiving a soggy welcome from the city of New York. Behind them came a procession of limousines jammed full of city officials, statesmen, and diplomats in undignified congestion. Behind these came another limousine, and in the rear seat of which, in lonely splendor, sat the sole passenger, Dorothy Kilgallen. You know, she was able not only to cover the coronation, but then what I found out that's new in this book is that Dorothy Kilgallen ended up getting a scoop. And that scoop was the Queen of England let Dorothy go with the Queen to a beauty parlor. Queen Elizabeth gets her first permanent. Now you talk about trust, okay?
Wild.
Trust. Queen Elizabeth of England had a permanent wave today, the first she's had since she became queen. She was tied up in clamps and pads for some 2 hours at the palace as beauticians at Emil's, the royal hairdresser, worked marvelously over Her Majesty in preparation for the coronation. Nobody else got to do that. Dorothy Kilgallen was there. And here's one I think that'll blow your mind. It did mine. A guy got in touch with me, another one of those crowdsourcers guys, and he told me about the fact that guess who was responsible for Puff the Magic Dragon, which was first a poem and then a song, right?
Yeah,
Was it Peter, Paul, and Mary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Guess who was responsible for telling people that the poem and the song were all about drugs?
I bet it wasn't Walter Winchell.
It certainly wasn't. It was Dorothy Kilgallen. And the poet and the author, Lenny Lipton, just died recently. And he really used to get upset because he said that song and poem had nothing to do with drugs until Dorothy Kilgallen wrote an article in Newsweek, somehow or another, alleging that was what it was all about. How about that, huh?
I mean, that's amazing.
Well, that story or that rumor or that myth or whatever you want to call it still lingers today. That's Puff the Magic Dragon is still believed to be a drug song.
Absolutely. Well,
I mean,
Dorothy is the one. I don't know how she found out. I've never found that she used the evil weed or anything. But anyway. So the other thing that people ask, and one of the things that I do in this book, The Improbable Journey, is in the first few chapters, let people know what led me up to becoming a reliable person, a reliable journalist, investigative reporter, and author who could cover the JFK assassination. And one of the first things that I was interested in is just something plain. How in the world did Dorothy Kilgallen get so interested in JFK's death? Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I found articles this time and one video who taught by a CBS producer named Marlon Swing, who worked on What's My Line and some other CBS show. And he recalls the night he and Kilgallen returned from a Broadway opening and were sitting in her office. The phone rang, he said, and was very late, 1:30 in the morning. It was Ted Sorensen, who you remember,
Sure.
Special counsel to the president, no small potatoes. They were talking, and I heard Dorothy say, "Oh, really? Say hello to him, too." Jack Kennedy had walked into the room, asked who Sorensen was talking to, and when he learned it was Dorothy, said, "Say hi for me." Another account is when you went to the Stork Club, Gianni. You remember Bob Bach, who was Dorothy's best friend, said at the Stork Club, "I watched with a mischievous thrill as Jack Kennedy, a young senator out late with someone other than his wife, touched base with Dorothy. 'Hello,' Dorothy said. 'Do you remember when we played charades at your home?'" And he was at parties at Dorothy's home. But the kicker there, guys, was when Pierre Salinger invited Dorothy and her son, Kerry, who was in the 3rd grade, to the White House. And in the library, Pierre Salinger had JFK come in. He made a big fuss over little Kerry and the letters he brought from his 3rd grade classmates. He gave him a PT 109 pen and all of that. When she watched JFK's assassination and learned about it, what did she write? She wrote, what I remember is a tall man stooping over a little boy from the 3rd grade, praising for his letters. That's who died on November 22nd. And that was the link. That was the bond between them. And once she watched Jack Ruby shoot Larry Harvey Oswald, she didn't buy that at all. She didn't buy what was going on there. And she was off to Dallas. She was off to the trial. And that's where everything gets picked up. When I found out about that, I was just amazed that she was there. I never knew she was there.
Wow.
And yet she, out of 400 reporters, Gianni, you'll be interested in this, 400 reporters, she's the only one that interviewed Jack Ruby.
Well, Jack knew her. I mean, Jack knew the relationship, and she did also with Costello and him and her.
She did. I don't know if you know, but Jack Ruby's favorite program was What's My Line? They watched that in the Carousel Club. So when she was at the trial, she said to her co-counsel, Joe Tonahill, "Yes, I want to talk to Dorothy." And then she got that interview, and that launched this 18-month investigation that she had, that we can talk about what she found and all that kind of thing. And then, of course, led up to her death. But you're right, Gianni, you can connect all of these people in there. Because what did Dorothy do first thing after interviewing Jack Ruby? She didn't go to Cuba and look into the Cuban, possibility of killing JFK. She didn't stay in Dallas and look into LBJ. She didn't go to Washington, D.C. and look into the military complex. She went to New Orleans.
That's right.
And the man that she was, she didn't really, the first column that she wrote, Oswald file must not close. And then she wrote all these columns basically questioning J. Edgar Hoover, shouting Oswald alone, Oswald. Dorothy was right, as we will see, especially.
Oh, we know that. I know that personally firsthand. I bumped into them.
She was right, but nobody listened to her. And that's one of the relevance of what my research is. We need to ask questions today. They didn't ask enough questions back then about the JFK assassination, about Marilyn Monroe's death, about Dorothy's death. We can't, if it's politicians especially, we can't take their word for anything. We can't go to Wikipedia and believe all that's on there. We want to look for people of truth like Dorothy Kilgallen, because she gave us the truth.
The problem is, as you know, everything is so politically motivated now. I mean, you're not going to get anything done. Unfortunately, it's going to get so frustrating. And I was just a fly on the wall.
That's right. I think she would throw up over the coverage that we get today. Where's Walter Cronkite when you need him? I mean, somebody with some class and integrity to them. So she went to New Orleans. She was there. Mark Sinclair, who you knew, was with her. Yeah. When she got there,
he traveled with her.
What's that?
He traveled with
That's right.
her.
And so she had him to come with her to take care of her hair and everything. He went to the hotel, and about 2 hours later, whoever she met spooked her. And she called him at the hotel and said, "You go back to New York City and don't you tell anybody you were here." And I have that on recordings at the DorothyKilgallenStory.org, where people can listen to Mark Sinclair's version of what happened there. So what did she do? Whatever she found there, she came back to New York City and she made a huge mistake, just like Marilyn Monroe did when she said she was going to the media about her affairs with Robert and Jack Kennedy and matters of national security. They told her all of that. She was a blabbermouth. I'm going to crack the JFK assassination investigation wide open. I know it wasn't a conspiracy. I know there's a conspiracy to kill JFK, a plot to kill. She started talking about all that. She even did that to her attorney, Mort Farber, by the way, Gianni, who was also Frank Costello's lawyer. That's all intermingled in there. And I don't know if you know, but she actually met with Frank Costello in Little Italy at one point. And Mark Sinclair tells the story. He gave her a diamond bracelet. All right, because they were really good friends. They'd been at the PJ Clark's and all of that. And she said it was so big she couldn't wear it, so they made it into a necklace. So she was involved in all of that was going on at that particular time. So then we get to the point where Dorothy Kilgallen, what did she know when she was going to write this book for Random House? The publisher was who? Bennett Cerf, who was one of her panelists on What's My Line. She was going to write the book for Random House, and it was going to be a tell-all book about the JFK assassination and all of that. The question is, what did she know? Well, before I wrote this book and researched this book and found this incredible, shocking information, I was on a radio program the other night, and Mark, this guy who I have a lot of respect for, said to me, Mark, I don't know exactly what you can tell us about the corruption right now. We'll do that later. But it sounds to me like that what you've uncovered is as important as the Pentagon Papers or the Nixon tapes or Snowden's release of the NSA documents, because this is corruption at the Warren Commission, government corruption at its very worst. And so what did I do? Well, I knew that. What's that?
Can I interrupt you for a second, please?
Of course.
We'll leave that as at a cliffhanger. Gianni, I think it's time to do a commercial.
Okay, we'll be right back. We have to make a few dollars, Mark.
Perfect.
Don't anybody go anywhere. You can understand how important this is.
Yeah.
We'll be right back.
This is Patrick Piccarelli, co-host of the Hollywood Godfather podcast. I'm also the president of Condo Security and Investigations, a full-time investigative and security firm established in 1988. We are located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with worldwide affiliates. Our business paradigm is simple: to provide the most professional services possible while maintaining an ethical standard and client satisfaction. Our areas of expertise include criminal and civil investigations, asset searches, surveillance, executive protection, question documents, background investigations, computer forensics, polygraph, and many other services. Our staff consists of former law enforcement professionals with hundreds of years of combined experience. Your initial consultation is free. Visit our website, www.condorprivateeye.com, or call 724-396-2808. Thank you.
Okay, we're back.
Well, the whole situation then with Dorothy as the fall of 1965 comes along. What do we know that she knows? She's got Jack Ruby's version of what happened. Now, I have in the new book, never been in a book before that I know of, Jack Ruby's lie detector test and Jack Ruby's psychological exam. And if you look at those, and also him saying that he just happened by the basement at the Dallas Police Department, and
oh my God,
and then I was able to get in, and I mean, there are people out there who are so stupid that they still believe that happened. Well, we have an account from a parking lot manager who says that he overheard Ruby saying on the telephone, "I will be there," when Oswald's going to be transferred.
He was told to be there.
There's some more of these.
He was there 2 hours before the transfer. He was told to be there to take out the Oswald.
Just crazy stuff. So anyway, that's what happened. So Dorothy, what does she know? Well, she knows what Ruby told her, and she went to New Orleans because and I have proven, and I think I hope you agree, in the Poisoned Patriarch and the Reporter Who Knew Too Much, you have to look at motive. I'm sure that's what Patrick does with his investigations, and I did as a criminal defense lawyer. And when I write my books, I never had any, experience with writing. I never had any classes or anything. I learned how to write books by talking to juries when I was a criminal defense lawyer, when I worked with Leffley Bailey, when I handled high-profile cases, when I was a network legal analyst for Tyson's case and Kobe Bryant's and O.J. Simpson's. I talked to the readers as to what I found out. And in this particular situation, I knew what Dorothy knew at that particular time because she got that information from Ruby. And then she went back and said she was going to crack the investigation wide open. And what I believe from my research, she realized a really common sense situation. This was a mafia hit of JFK. And how did she realize that? In 1960, Joe Kennedy, using his mafia buddies, helped fix the 60 election by calling in Gianni.
I was a part of that. I was traveling state to state.
Well, you should have been arrested then, for sure.
Yeah. We can take care of that. I didn't know what it was about.
Oh, yeah, sure. We've heard that kind of.
I was 16.
I had no idea that this was going on. Anyway, so what happens? Well, Joe makes this deal with the devil. You guys, you bad guys, and Gianni, Marcello, Costello, all these guys, we'll leave you alone if we get in the White House if you help us. So they help him win the election. They beat the hell out of him.
Well, that was all because Joe promised that the first duty his son would do was invade Cuba and give him the casinos back. I know that firsthand.
That was another part of the deal, but basically they were going to leave him alone. Well, what does Bobby do? Bobby's the runt of the litter in the Kennedy family. He wants to show he's important. And so he deports Carlos Marcello to the wilds of Guatemala, where he almost dies. And then this guy comes back to the United States, gets in somewhere or another, and the revenge is on his mind. Nick Pileggi, who gave a nice endorsement for this book that's on the cover, was telling me, Marcello was Sicilian. It's all about revenge. You can't mess around with those guys. And so what happens? Well, Marcello wants to kill Bobby Kennedy, strangle him to death. But if he does that, he knows that JFK will come after him with everything the government has. So what does he do? They orchestrate JFK's death. Bobby is powerless, which is exactly what they wanted. So that was the common sense theme that Dorothy had in her mind. So she's going to plop that into her book, and that's going to expose problems with Hoover and Marcello and all these people. Her enemies are gathering. There are more enemies all the time. And then she is able, as you may remember, with a real exclusive at the time. And I never knew how she got this information until the research for this book and my whistleblower, who was a legislative assistant to a Warren Commission member and was there in the hearings. And you'll, I think, be absolutely shocked when you hear what he has to say that the member told him. But she was able to get the Jack Ruby testimony at the Warren Commission before it was supposed to be released. And she went ahead and, with the permission of her publisher, put that on the front page of the New York Journal American. And there was a big scandal about it. And J. Edgar Hoover was all upset. And I love this visual. He sent two of his goons, his agents, over to Dorothy's home. She doesn't want a lawyer. They sit there, and you can see these guys. I like to think they're 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds, muscular and everything. And here's little Dorothy on the couch, and they're interrogating her. And I've got in the book what she said to them, and it chills me when I say it, because this was what Dorothy was all about. How did you get those materials? How did you get that testimony? It was a friend of long standing. I am not about to tell you who it is. I'm not going to tell you from what city they came. I'm not going to do. And I would rather die than give you my source. That should be on her tombstone, because that was this woman. And Hoover was just as upset as you can possibly imagine, because it made him look stupid. He was in charge of the Warren Commission, as you know.
Well, I know, and they were very happy that he was, because Costello talked to him daily. I mean,
we'll talk about that connection for sure. So Dorothy knows that, and she knows what Ruby told her and everything else. So I don't know how much time we have in this particular program, but
we have about 10 more minutes.
All right, so let me just lead up to what happened here with regard to the shocking evidence we're going to give, because it will take the entire time that we're going to have left. All right, so I've got all that information and I'm very happy with it, and I'm going to put it in this particular book along with all the other. I've also got, you should know, in the book, I found in 1970, it get more into the Kennedy mindset. In 1973, a book was written called The Kennedy Neurosis by a well-known writer and psychologist of the time. And she talks about the Kennedys in there. And she talks about the fact that they were mirror images of Joe Kennedy. They were mirror images in terms of having very few morals or ethics. They were mirror images of Joe running around with every skirt that he could possibly find. They wouldn't do anything without Joe's approval. It's so enlightening in terms of who the Kennedys were. And as you know, that's easily proven by, Joe Kennedy, what Jack Kennedy say, if I don't have sex every day, I get a headache. It's those kinds of comments by them. And I have a couple really good stories in the book with regard to, at one particular point, this columnist, not Dorothy, but somebody else, actually catches Joe at one of his secretary's apartments, lives next door. And she finds out that, he's over there with her, and she takes a couple photographs. And the next day, she puts a note on his door saying, I have this information, leave this woman alone, or I'm going to do this. She encounters him on the street. He puts his finger in her nose and says, you want to work in this town ever again? Don't you do that. Don't you do that. Well, basically, she did. She went ahead and sent it to Ben Bradley at the Washington Post, who was a very close friend of the Kennedys. That picture never appeared. The story never appeared.
Of course.
They were not going to do that with the Kennedys. The other one is, I don't know if either one of you know it or not, but JFK was actually married when he married Jacqueline Kennedy.
No, first I'm hearing
No, I
that.
didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Where's the proof of that?
What is interesting is sometimes information is out there that I find from some other authors, but I always watch who that author is. I've always felt like that Seymour Hersh was pretty darn credible with what he found out about things. And what I liked about him what I do is I confirm information that I get. Well, he had a story about the fact that he had some things about Maryland, but basically he came up with the knowledge that just not too long before Jackie and JFK married Jackie, Jack Kennedy fell in love with a Palm Beach socialite. Her name was Dury Malcolm. Called by the media at that particular time, is this JFK's secret first bride? And Hearst basically wrote in his book, The Dark Side of Camelot, that JFK loved this Duriel and wanted to obviously sleep with her. But there's an account in here, she told her sister and she told her father that she would not sleep with Jack Kennedy unless he married her. And so they went down to the Palm Beach courthouse and they got married. And it was never annulled. What Joe Kennedy did was go down and destroy all the records and everything else like that. Well, that wasn't enough for me. I wasn't going to report that until I found an FBI document that talks about the fact that marriage took place. Oh, wow. And there are records that they found somewhere or another that confirm it. And it
sounds like one of my marriages last week.
Very well could be. And in this, here's what it says. Copies of the material are attached here to and will be noted in the left-hand column, page 884. There is listed a member of the family, 11th generation, Dury Kerr Malcolm, pointed out out in the statement is contained therein that the third husband of Dury was John F. Kennedy, son of Joseph Kennedy, one-time ambassador to England.
That's right.
So that was interesting to me because what it really shows is, to me, how Joe Kennedy was the king of the cover-ups.
Oh, my God.
He could cover up everything that went on with the Kennedys. And as you will see, he and Bobby worked their asses off to cover up the truth about the assassination and who was responsible at the Warren Commission, using Katzenbach, the Assistant Attorney General, to do so. So that's where we are. We know Dorothy probably knew about all of this. Now, at that time, columnists were very reticent to talk about dirty laundry with any of the politicians, and so she probably wouldn't have printed something like that, I don't believe. So now we get to the point where let's talk about the whole situation with the Warren Commission. And for many people, this is old news. This is 1960. This is 60 years ago. I think it's 60 years ago from what I think is JFK's finest hour, when he basically, in many ways, saved the world from a nuclear holocaust by backing down the Cubans. And,
right.
And yes, we're 60 years from then, but it's important. It's history. And what we're going to talk about is the corruption at the Warren Commission. Well, how did I feed into that? Well, first of all, I had to learn, I must admit, and I'm not real, proud of it or anything. I had to learn more about the Warren Commission being convened. What happened there? Well, it was Executive Order 11/11/30, signed by President Johnson on November 29th, 1963. Now, what is
7 days later?
That's 7 days later. And the commission was directed to evaluate all the facts and circumstances surrounding the assassination and the subsequent killing of the alleged assassin. Now, watch closely, because we're going to see that all they do ever is focus on Oswald, and to report its findings and conclusions to the president. On December 12th, they started issuing the subpoenas. Who was appointed to the Warren Commission? Maybe you remember, maybe you don't. United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren, Republican Congressman and future President Gerald Ford, former CIA Director Allen Dulles, who, by the way, had been fired by JFK, Georgia Senator Richard Russell, Representative Hale Boggs of Louisiana, former President and Presidential Advisor John McCloy, and Kentucky Senator John Sherman Cooper, each known, despite political party affiliation, for their conservative political views. The work of federal agencies bolstered their efforts, the Commission's efforts, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Secret Service, with the former conducting, according to the report, more than 25,000 interviews and re-interviews of persons having information of possible relevance to the investigation.
Mark, can I ask you a question? Wasn't All Inspector on the commission?
No, he wasn't on the commission, but he was an advisor to the commission.
Okay. His name is always being bandied about. I think probably because he survived the longest out of all of them.
I think that's right also. And then Lee Rankin was also an advisor to the Warren Commission. I think he was the attorney for the Warren Commission. Okay. We'll talk about Specter a little bit later, because my whistleblower worked for our inspector at one particular point. So what was I looking for? I'd never looked in. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed as a researcher that I never looked into the Warren Commission very much. Nobody ever did. CBS, for God's sakes, I found out, did a 4-part investigation of the Warren Commission, 1973, I think it is, or whatever, a few years later. They never got into any of the collusion, of the Oswald alone obsession, of any of that kind of thing. None of the authors at that time did. None of the journalists. Nobody else did. Dorothy even didn't do so after it happened. Everybody missed it. They just accepted that Oswald alone theory that made very little sense, if any at all. So what happened there? Well, I started to look into the Warren Commission, and the first thing I found was gold, although what I found later was more gold. And that was audio tape conversations between LBJ and J. Edgar Hoover. There's 2 different sets of them. The first one was on November 29th, as a matter of fact, when they established the commission with these members. It was LBJ and Hoover talking about who they wanted on the commission. And
who they could control on the commission.
That's right. And it was so enlightening, because if you want me to, I can read a couple of those before we have to take another break. All
sure.
Right? Here's one of them. The secretary says, J. Edgar Hoover on extension 2192. LBJ, J. Edgar Hoover, are you familiar with this proposed group that they are trying to put together on this study of your report and other things? 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, somebody from the court, a couple of outsiders. Hoover, I haven't heard of that. I've seen reports on Senate Investigation Committee that they've been talking about. LBJ, well, I think we don't want to have, I just want to get by with filing your report, which obviously was the whole Oswald alone situation. Hoover, I think it would be very, very bad to have a rash of investigations. LBJ, well, the only way we can stop him is probably to appoint a high-level investigation to evaluate your report and put somebody that is pretty good on it and that I can select out of the government and tell the House and the Senate not to go ahead with the investigation. They didn't want the Senate and the House. They didn't want Texas doing an investigation. They didn't want anybody else doing an investigation, as will become clear as we get a little bit further. J. Edgar Hoover, yes. LBJ, because we get a bunch of television going, and that's going to be bad. Hoover, it'll be a 3-ring circus, and then they talk about the members. What do you think about Alan Dulles? Alan Dulles, that's LBJ. Hoover, I think he's a good man. What about John McCloy, American lawyer, diplomat, banker, and presidential advisor? Well, I'm not enthusiastic about him. I knew him back in the Patterson days, down the secretary thing. He's a good man, but I'm not so certain as the matter of publicity he might seek. They don't want anybody talking to anybody.
Right.
All right. I guess Bob started in the House. I felt pretty good about, and Jerry Ford in the House. Try to get Dick Russell from Georgia, and maybe Cooper in the Senate. Yeah, I think so. Russell's an excellent man. Yes, he is. But I don't know about Jerry Ford. How about Cooper? I thought Cooper might look after the liberal group, even though he's conservative. Cooper can. Oh yeah. They would think he's a pretty judicious fellow. Now you're going to hear from my whistleblower who says the reason they put Cooper on there was because how respected he was as a senator, and I have some tribute to him. I wouldn't, LBJ, I wouldn't want Senator Jacob Javits. Oh, no, says Hoover. None of those, he plays the front page. We don't want him. Cooper's kind of border state. It's not South, it's not North. That's right. Do you know Ford from Michigan? LBJ asked. I know of him, but I don't know him. LBJ, all right. Hoover says, I saw him on TV the other night and he seemed to handle himself pretty well, pretty soft-spoken. Do you know Boggs, Senator Hale Boggs? Yeah, I know him. He's offered the resolution to look into this. Well, I don't know about him either. And then LBJ, it's like a love affair between LBJ and Hoover. LBJ, I tell you, I appreciate that. I didn't ask because I know you know how to run your business better than anybody else. Oh, man.
What a joke.
And I just want to tell you, though, that we consider certain people of high class as you, and it's mighty gracious thing to do. We might be happy and salute you knowing how to pick good men. The head of the FBI is basically going to pick the people on this particular commission.
Oh, Mark, I don't want to interrupt you, but we're going to have you on for another show. And what we were thinking of is once the commission is formed, and they do what they have to do, whether it's agreed with or not, whoever's listening to us, you found an informant who was still alive. And this is a first in American history that this person has been spoken to. So what I'm suggesting is that we leave the show here, all right, and we get into the informant for the entire second show. What do you think?
Perfect. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So it's been wonderful having you. You've opened our eyes to a lot of stuff. But
again,
wait until we start talking about what you're going to give us next week. So we would like everybody to come back. The people have to be glued to their phones listening to this. But next week is even going to be more eye-opening. So
I believe it is.
We thank Mark Shore for this enlightening hour, and we will see you next week.
It's a deal. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week, as we know, with Mark. So don't go anywhere. Tell your friends. And he's got a lot of information that we should be knowing about going on with our lives to find out who's running this country and how the history, how bad it's been. And we've been told a bunch of lies, fortunately and unfortunately.
Yeah, and we'll connect Joe Biden into all of this. How about that?
Oh, good. I love it. Not that he can remember anything, but
Oh,
Somebody told me today that Biden is going to get assassinated by slipping in the shower. Which
no comment on that.
Yeah,
no comment.
Very profound. Anyway, once again, thank you, Mark. We'll see you next week.
yes.
Deal.
Thank you, guys. Everybody tune in, please. You can't believe where the show's going to go. God bless you all. Have a safe week.
If you're feeling sad and lonely, there's a service I could render. I'm the one who loves you only. I could be so warm, so tender. Call me. Don't be afraid, you can call me. Maybe it's late, but just call me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hollywood Godfather podcast. You can contact Gianni Russo, Patrick Picciarelli, or myself, Megan Horan, with your questions and comments through the contact section of our website, HollywoodGodfatherPodcast.com, which is where you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can also call and leave us a message at 646-776-3038. Remember to follow us on Instagram at Hollywood Godfather and on Facebook, as well as leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We'd like to know what you like about what we're doing, what you'd like to hear in the future, and anything else you might suggest to improve our podcast. Most importantly, hit the subscribe button. We'll be back next week with stories of the mob and Hollywood, as well as answers to your messages. Good night.
Don't be afraid, you can call me. Maybe it's late, but just call me. Tell me and I'll be around. I'll be around. Give me a call. When I was 17, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for small town girls and soft summer nights. We'd hide from the lights on the village green. When I was 17, I did it my